Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, January 15, 2026. President Donald Trump threatens to invoke the Insurrection Act and send troops to Minneapolis as anti-ICE protests escalate following now 2 shootings in the past week involving federal law enforcement officers. Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado meets with President Trump at the White House and with a bipartisan group of senators on Capitol Hill about the future of Venezuela after the U.S. military removed former President Nicolas Maduro. United Nations Security Council holds an emergency meeting on the Iranian government's deadly response to protests throughout that country. U.S. Senate passes another package of federal spending bills, sending it to the president as the clock ticks to another potential partial government shutdown at the end of the month. President Trump presents a health care reform proposal he calls the Great Health Care Plan. It includes giving people money directly to buy health insurance. And federal prosecutors in Philadelphia charged more than 24 people with plotting to rig U.S. college and Chinese professional basketball games. Minnesota Public Radio reporting that President Donald Trump on Thursday threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act to suppress protests in Minnesota a week after an ICE agent fatally shot a 37-year-old Minneapolis woman. The shooting death of Renee Macklin Good sparked protests nationwide against ICE's continued presence in Minnesota and across the country. Protesters were further incensed on Wednesday evening when ICE agents in Minneapolis shot a Venezuelan immigrant in the leg during an attempted arrest. Writing on Truth Social, President Trump said, "If the corrupt politicians of Minnesota don't obey the law and stop the professional agitators and insurrectionists from attacking the patriots of ICE who are only trying to do their job, I will institute the Insurrection Act, which many presidents have done before me, and quickly put an end to the travesty that is taking place in that once great state." That was from Minnesota Public Radio. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem answered reporters' questions about this today in the White House driveway.
Do you have any plans to pull out of Minnesota?
No plans to pull out of Minnesota.
How would you describe what you were seeing on the ground there? Would you describe it as an insurrection, and do you believe the president should invoke the Insurrection Act?
I describe it as violent and a violation of the law in many places. I discussed with the president this morning several things that we are dealing with under the department and different operations. We did discuss the Insurrection Act. He certainly has the constitutional authority to utilize that. My hope is that this leadership team in Minnesota will start to work with us to get criminals off the streets. Remember, we are there in surged operations because of the largest fraud scheme in American history. We had people stealing from taxpayers, stealing funds away from the most vulnerable individuals in this country, people who needed mental health services, developmental services, autism, daycare. Instead, individuals came in, much from the Somalian community, and stole dollars from those people who needed it and put it in their own pockets and enriched themselves. Did it right under Governor Walz's nose, and we believe that he didn't just know about it, that he may be complicit in it as well.
Thank you, Secretary. Do you believe there are any cases in Minnesota where the ICE agents have gone too far?
Our ICE agents are following the law and running their operations according to training. Last night what we saw was 3 individuals weaponize shovels and brooms and attack an ICE officer that had to defend himself. So we're hopeful that we don't see that again, that these protesters and violent rioters will be held accountable for the actions that they're taking and that our officers can do their work safely.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem speaking to reporters outside the White House. The 1807 Insurrection Act allows the president to deploy armed forces to carry out law enforcement functions, including making arrests and conducting searches. It has been invoked about 30 times in U.S. history. Last time was 1992 by President George H.W. Bush to address the Los Angeles riots. Secretary Noem was also asked today about cases of ICE officers asking for proof of citizenship. One video posted by a Somali resident of Minneapolis showing the officers asking for ID and saying they're conducting a citizen check. She says she's an American citizen.
Why are we seeing Americans being asked on the street to provide proof of citizenship in Minnesota? Is that targeted enforcement? And are you advising Americans to carry proof of citizenship?
In every situation, we're doing targeted enforcement. If we are on a target and doing an operation, there may be individuals surrounding that criminal that we may be asking who they are and why they're there and having them validate their identity. That's what we've always done, in asking people who they are so that we know who's in those surroundings. And if they are breaking our federal laws, we will detain them as well until we run that processing.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem at a news conference outside the White House. Governor Tim Walz, Democrat of Minnesota, writing online today, "I am making a direct appeal to the president. Let's turn the temperature down. Stop this campaign of retribution. This is not who we are." And the governor went on, and an appeal to Minnesotans. "I know this is scary. We must speak out loudly, urgently, but also peacefully. We cannot fan the flames of chaos. That's what he wants." The NAACP in Minneapolis held a news conference today about the ICE operations and the protests. Reverend Richard Pittman is president of the NAACP Minnesota and Dakotas chapter.
The NAACP strongly condemns the actions and the tactics of ICE that have led to the loss of life, the erosion of equity, and the escalation of fear and violence in Minnesota communities. This condemnation is underscored by the tragic and unacceptable death of Renee Good, whose life was taken in connection with ICE operations. We extend our deepest condolences and prayers to the Good family. No family should have to endure such a loss as a result of enforcement actions carried out without care, restraint, or humanity. Across Minnesota, civil rights monitoring and community reports confirm significant increases in ICE activity near schools, places of worship, businesses, and residential neighborhoods. These actions have destabilized immigrant-owned businesses, increased school absenteeism, and intensified fear among children, families, and elders. Faith and community organizations report rising need of emergency housing, food, mental health support directly tied to ICE activity. Of grave concern is the climate of intimidation and trauma created by heavy concentration of ICE agents in certain Minnesota communities, often reported as exceeding the presence of local law enforcement. The loss of Renee Good's life and the widespread psychological harm inflicted on Minnesota residents are unacceptable and must stop. Our neighborhoods are not war zones. Amen. Our schools are not targets. Our young people are not criminals. To the people of Minnesota, we call you to remain united. This is not a moment of blame, division, or finger pointing. This is a collective state issue that impacts all of us, urban and rural, immigrants and native-born, black, brown, white, and indigenous. No community asked for this harm. No family wanted this pain. We must stand together as one Minnesota. Hear, hear.
Reverend Richard Pittman, president of the NAACP Minnesota and Dakotas chapter, at a news conference today in Minneapolis. Associated Press reporting that 3 Minnesota residents have sued the Trump administration, saying arrests and traffic stops during an immigration crackdown are racist. The lawsuit was filed Thursday in federal court by the American Civil Liberties Union of Minnesota. Reporting from Associated Press. This is Washington Today, and now to Venezuela. President Donald Trump meeting today at the White House with the Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. As an NBC News article puts it, his administration relies on the remnants of deposed leader Nicolas Maduro's regime to run the country. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked about the meeting at her news conference in the White House briefing room.
What can you share about the president's meeting with Maria Corina Machado? Is it underway? What can you share about that? And then also, the president said yesterday that Delcy Rodriguez was, quote, a terrific person. Does the president trust the remaining members of the Maduro regime?
I will say, to your first question, the meeting was about to begin as I was stepping out of the Oval Office moments ago, so my understanding is that it's underway right now. I know the President was looking forward to this meeting, and he's was expecting it to be a good and positive discussion with Ms. Machado, who is really a remarkable and brave voice for many of the people of Venezuela. So the President looks forward to obviously talking to her about the realities on the ground in the country and what is taking place. As for Ms. Rodriguez, the President did speak with her directly this week. As you know, he revealed that to all of you yesterday. And Secretary Rubio and the administration have been in constant communication with Ms. Rodriguez and other members of the interim government in Venezuela. They have been extremely cooperative. They have thus far met all of the demands and requests of the United States and of the President. And I think you have all seen that play out. We obviously had a $500 million energy deal that was struck in large part because of the cooperation from Ms. Rodriguez. Venezuela and Ms. Rodriguez have also confirmed that they will be releasing political prisoners from Venezuela. There were 5 Americans who were recently released this week as well. So the President likes what he's seeing and will expect that cooperation to continue.
The White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, in the White House briefing room. CNN writing the United States has completed its first sale of Venezuelan oil valued at $500 million, according to an administration official. Additional sales of oil are expected in the coming days and weeks, the official said. From the New York Times, U.S. authorities said Thursday that they had seized a tanker that was operating in defiance of the Trump administration's partial blockade on sanctioned vessels transporting oil from Venezuela, the 6th ship intercepted since December. A federal official briefed on the operation who spoke on condition of anonymity discussed the sensitive matter, said U.S. authorities had a seizure warrant for the tanker called the Veronica. That was from the New York Times. Energy Secretary Chris Wright was asked today about the United States strategy when it comes to Venezuela's government and oil. He was at the U.S. Energy Association State of the Energy Industry Forum in Washington, D.C.
Project next 4 or 5 years in Venezuela, if political stability there, what would be the best outcome in Venezuela?
So the real quick history, when I was born, Venezuela was the third largest producer of oil in the world. U.S. was number 1, Soviet Union was number 2, Venezuela was number 3 in the world. Venezuela was top 10 in per capita income. Peaceful, thriving democracy. Of course, a lot of money flowing in fast, corruption issues. Not perfect, but a successful nation that was one of the wealthiest nations in Latin America, a great American ally, and of course, top-down control, dictatorship, or whatever, it's fallen down. So the goal is to go back where it was. So in the short term, we saw in Iraq, if you disempower, the de-Baathification, everybody that was in power, everybody that has the guns, and everybody that knows how to run the levers of the civil service and the government, that doesn't go well. So we are dealing with the people with the guns today. We have, I think, the better faction of the people that have the guns in Venezuela, but this is not a democratically elected representative government of the Venezuelan people. We want to keep the nation together. We want to see the economic conditions improve as quickly as possible for the people that live in Venezuela. We want to see the return of rule of law and order. We're going to see, hopefully, significant growth in the economy, make the conditions so American businesses and others will go back into the country and invest, and ultimately on a pathway to a representative government that's chosen and represents the will of the Venezuelan people, that is, again, a peaceful, market-based U.S. ally, star member of our hemisphere. That's the vision.
Energy Secretary Chris Wright at a program today in Washington hosted by the U.S. Energy Association. The Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado left her meeting with President Trump at the White House and then went to Capitol Hill to meet with a bipartisan group of senators. There was a pool spray. The cameras invited in to see them all together, but they did not talk to the press. We do have that 1 minute of video at our video library at cspan.org. After the meeting with the senators, she spoke with reporters outside.
Did you offer to President Trump your Nobel Peace Prize?
I presented the President of the United States the medal of the Nobel Peace Prize, and I told him this. Listen to this. 200 years ago, General Lafayette gave Simón Bolívar a medal with George Washington's face on it. Bolívar since then kept that medal for the rest of his life. Actually, when you see his portraits, you can see the medal there. And it was given by General Lafayette as a sign of the brotherhood between the United States, people of the United States and the people of Venezuela in their fight for freedom against tyranny. And 200 years in history, the people of Bolivar are giving back to the heir of Washington a medal, in this case a medal of the Nobel Peace Prize, as a recognition for his unique commitment with our freedom.
New York Times writing, speaking to the nation, Venezuela's interim leader, Delcy Rodriguez, framed her current negotiations with Washington as a necessity, while also characterizing the capture of President Nicolas Maduro as a stain in the relations between the U.S. and Venezuela. She said of the United States, "We know that they are a lethal nuclear power. We have seen their record in human history. We know, and we are not afraid to confront them diplomatically through political dialogue." The New York Times article goes on. She then seemed to send a message to Venezuela's opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, who met with President Trump at the White House on Thursday. Without naming Machado, Rodriguez said, "And if one day as acting president I have to go to Washington, I will do so with my head held high, not on my knees." Again, reporting from the New York Times. Venezuela came up several times today at a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing, with the testimony from the nominee for U.S. Southern Command Commander, Lieutenant General Francis Donovan. Senator Rick Scott, Republican of Florida, asked him about the military operation that captured President Nicolas Maduro.
Joan Donovan, as nominee to lead Southcom, what do you think our enemies learned from the president's decisive action and our military success in Venezuela? What do you think dictators like Putin and Xi thought when they saw the flawless execution by our military?
Senator, thank you for the time in your office. Obviously, I have not seen any of the details or intel analysis of what they're thinking, from an intel perspective. But Senator, I have to believe they would be very wary of the U.S. military. The precision execution at range, speed, and scale it was phenomenal. It's what we bring to the fight across the globe. So I hope they're paying attention, Senator.
Joe Donovan, what do you believe the communist regime in Cuba, do you believe they are a threat to the United States national security?
Senator, I think that regime has always been a threat to U.S. national security. And again, if confirmed, I intend to get to Southcom headquarters to determine the status of that threat and provide military options if asked.
Senator Rick Scott, Republican of Florida, questioning Southcom Commander nominee Lieutenant General Francis Donovan at today's Armed Services Committee meeting. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, asked this witness about military assets still positioned off the Venezuelan coast.
General Donovan, the United States continues to have a massive military presence in the Caribbean after the rendition of Nicolas Maduro. The purpose of having that presence there was supposedly to extricate him so as to bring him to justice. Now that it has been accomplished, what is the purpose of maintaining that continuing massive presence in the Caribbean?
Senator, thank you for the time in your office and also sharing the stories of your children that have served honorably in this nation, so thank you for that. Senator, from my perspective, how I think about that problem set is, or the opportunities of the buildup in the Caribbean or South America right now with those assets. I put the hat on, if confirmed, responsibility of sustaining those assets over time. So I know there'll be a global demand, as they are, for those very high priority assets like a carrier strike group or an amphibious ready group and a marine expeditionary unit. They're needed all around the globe, and there's not enough of them. So my number one thought, Senator, is to understand, again, can we sustain and maintain if they stay? And if they are moved out for other reasons, how do we actually replace the capability or move in different directions with that both hard and soft power approach to achieve the objectives outlined in the NSS, Senator?
it's no secret, General, that Americans are concerned that there may be the use of those assets either to once again put troops on the ground in Venezuela, albeit they were only briefly in the last time, or in Cuba or another country in Southcom. Are you aware of any plans to begin any strike using those assets or others?
Senator, I am not in my current position in the Pentagon working for a U.S. Special Operations Command. I'm not privy to those plans, but I commit to you, if confirmed, I will be fully involved in any future planning, Senator.
Questions to Lieutenant General Francis Donovan, nominated for U.S. Southern Command Commander, from Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, at today's Armed Services Committee hearing. Reuters writing that Cuba received on Thursday the remains of its 32 soldiers killed in combat during the U.S. attack on Venezuela and stunning capture of its president, Nicolas Maduro, paying homage to the troops as national heroes. The remains of the soldiers, members of Cuba's armed forces and intelligence agencies, arrived early on Thursday at Havana's International Airport in caskets draped in the Cuban flag. That was from Reuters. This is Washington Today. Turning to Iran, also a story from Reuters. The U.S. on Thursday imposed sanctions on 5 Iranian officials it accused of being behind the crackdown on protests and said it was tracking Iranian leaders' funds being wired to international banks as President Donald Trump keeps the pressure on Tehran. U.S. Treasury Department in a statement said it imposed sanctions on the Secretary of the Supreme Council for National Security as well as Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and law enforcement forces commanders, accusing them of being architects of the crackdown. Again, that was from Reuters. United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting on the Iranian protests and government response. Michael Waltz is the U.S. ambassador to the UN.
The level of violence, the level of repression that the Iranian regime has unleashed on its own citizens, its own people, has repercussions for international peace and security. You're going to hear today that it doesn't, that it's an internal matter. Absolutely wrong and false. This demands this council's attention. The people of Iran are demanding their freedom like never before in the Islamic Republic's brutal history. Unarmed, peaceful people who love their country are taking to the streets in pursuit of their legitimate aspirations for a better future. Well, this is our message. President Donald J. Trump and the United States of America stands by the brave people of Iran, period. And regardless of its excuses, and you will hear many today from the Iranian regime and from its friends, the regime is solely responsible for the economic misery of the Iranian people and the repression of their freedom, and they will be held accountable. The estimates of the numbers of protesters killed by the regime so far range from the thousands to the tens of thousands. Although visibility into the totality of the violence has been obscured deliberately by the regime's nationwide internet blackout. Why has the internet been shut down for weeks? Why have the phone lines been cut? Why are commercial satellite communications being jammed in a very sophisticated manner? We've had a complete blackout. No internet, no phones, no nothing. Only thanks to the Starlink system do we even have some window, a limited window, into the atrocities that are ongoing. Well, President Trump has been clear. He will not, nor should the international community, tolerate innocents being slaughtered in the streets.
U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Michael Waltz at today's meeting of the UN Security Council in New York City. Wall Street Journal reporting that President Trump was advised that a large-scale strike against Iran was unlikely to make the government fall and could spark a wider conflict, U.S. officials said. and for now will monitor how Tehran handles protesters before deciding on the scope of a potential attack. The U.S. would need more military firepower in the Middle East, both to launch a large-scale strike, protect American forces in the region, and allies like Israel should Iran retaliate, the advisors told Trump, the officials said. Reporting from the Wall Street Journal. Ambassador Walls said today at the UN Security Council meeting the U.S. may still use military force against Iran in the future.
Iran says it's ready for dialogue, but its actions say otherwise. This is a regime that rules through oppression, through violence, and through intimidation, and has destabilized the Middle East for decades. Well, enough is enough. We all have a responsibility to support the Iranian people and to put an end to the regime's neglect and oppression of the Iranian nation. Colleagues, let me be clear. President Trump is a man of action, not endless talk like we see at the United Nations. He has made it clear all options are on the table to stop the slaughter.
U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Michael Waltz at the UN Security Council meeting today. Vasily Nebenzia is the ambassador to the UN from Russia. He opposed what the U.S. is doing. He speaks through an interpreter.
Since the end of December, the whole world has been watching as the United States continues to escalate tensions and fuel hysteria around Iran, declaring that help is already on the way. What's more, in its official statements, Washington has not even tried to cover up the genuine reasons for its alleged concern over the country's internal political situation, as it threatens new strikes against Iran. Today's meeting, convened by our American colleagues, is nothing more than yet another attempt to justify blatant aggression and interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign state. And if, as Washington puts it, Iran's authorities do not come to their senses, then Washington will solve the Iranian problem in its favorite way through strikes aimed at overthrowing an undesirable regime. To lend credibility to their actions and to justify them, they have invited today's briefers, individuals who have been living in the United States for some 20 years and promoting an anti-Iranian agenda in Washington's interests. These so-called briefers cannot speak on behalf of the Iranian people. We firmly reject any attempts by the U.S. to waste council members' valuable time on briefings that are meant only to serve the interests and the position of those who convened this meeting, and briefings that are in no way related to issues of international peace and security.
Russian ambassador to the UN through an interpreter, Vasily Nebenzia, at today's UN Security Council emergency meeting on Iran and the protests happening there. Iran is not a current member of the UN Security Council, but its representative was invited to take part in today's meeting. Hossein Darzi is the deputy Iranian ambassador.
The United States' request for this meeting is shameful. To conceal their direct complicity in the crime their mercenaries have committed against our nations from 8 to 10 January. As part of Israel's malicious attempt to drag America into another war of aggression against Iran. Under the hollow pretext of concern for the Iranian people and claims of support for human rights, the United States regime is attempting to portray itself as a friend of the Iranian people, while simultaneously laying the groundwork for political destabilization and military intervention under a so-called humanitarian narrative. These claims are particularly cynical when viewed against the United States regime long and well-documented record of unlawful military interventions, regime change operations, and systematic violations of international law and the Charter of the United Nations. Across the world, these policies have led to mass civilian casualties. the collapse of states, prolonged humanitarian disasters, and the emergence and empowerment of extremist and terrorist groups. This is not a matter of opinion. It is a matter of historical record and fact.
Hossein Darzi is the deputy Iranian ambassador to the United Nations at today's UN Security Council meeting in New York City. The Times of San Diego writing the Pentagon has ordered the San Diego-based aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln to move to the Middle East amid turmoil in Iran. According to multiple media reports, the nuclear-powered carrier and its accompanying warships were operating in the South China Sea when the order came. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Friday on C-SPAN's Ceasefire. At a time when finding common ground matters most in Washington, Republican New York Congressman Mike Lawler and Democratic New Jersey Congressman Josh Gottheimer come together for a conversation on the top issues facing Congress as both parties prepare for the upcoming midterm elections. Join host Dasha Burns.
Bridging the divide in American politics.
Watch Ceasefire Friday at 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern and Pacific, only on C-SPAN.
And if you ever miss an episode of Ceasefire, you can always find it as a podcast at cspan.org and wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and at cspan.org. The U.S. Senate has passed a 3-bill spending package funding the Commerce, Energy, Interior, and Justice Departments, along with the EPA, NASA, and other agencies through September 30th, the end of the fiscal year. The vote was 82-15. The House passed this package last week, 397-28. So now it heads to President Trump to be signed into law. This all comes ahead of a government shutdown deadline of January 30th. Only 3 of the annual 12 spending bills to fund the government through the end of the fiscal year have been signed so far into law. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, spoke on the Senate floor this morning about today's vote and also the one that may be coming next.
Mr. President, we have a January 30 deadline to fund the remainder of the federal government, and we're on track to do that. Before we leave this week, the Senate will send another package of 3 bills to the President's desk. This package received a big bipartisan vote in the House last week. We've had a big bipartisan vote here in the Senate earlier this week, and we're on track to pass it later today. And President Trump is expected to sign it into law. Yesterday, the House passed another package of 2 bills, again with broad bipartisan support. And I want to point out that this package, like the 3-bill package we're considering in the Senate, actually spends less money than if we were to do just another continuing resolution. It cuts $10 billion, or more than 10%, from what we would expect to spend on these agencies under a continuing resolution. And that's thanks to our appropriators doing the hard work of going through the budget and making the tough budgeting decisions that all Americans are familiar with, whether they're running a business or managing their household budget. That's the result of a better process. And it's what happens when we make government funding a priority.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, on the Senate floor. In the afternoon, before the vote on that 3 spending bill package that ended up passing today, Senator Michael Bennet, Democrat from Colorado, spoke about an amendment that he introduced with the other senator from Colorado, also Democrat, John Hickenlooper. It never got a roll call vote, but he wanted to talk about it. It would restore funding for the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado.
Its research form the backbone of weather forecasting, disaster preparedness, water planning, wildfire prevention, and aviation safety all across our country. Its work even protects American troops overseas by providing next-generation weather prediction for military operations. NCAR scientists, engineers, and meteorologists equip emergency responders, airline pilots, farmers, local utility managers, and military planners with the tools they need to protect American lives, property, and our national security. The President has blown all that up, but as he tries to shut down this institution, the world has not gotten any less dangerous. We can't wish away extreme drought or pause seasonal wildfires, which, as my colleague from other Western states know, don't stop at state lines and barely have a season at all anymore because they're so present. And you can't rebuild decades of scientific research and expertise once it is destroyed. That's why today my colleague Senator Hickenlooper and I are offering an amendment to the appropriations package that would protect funding for NCAR. This isn't about one lab, one institution, or even one state, Mr. President. It's about protecting the foundation of our national research capacity, a capacity built over decades and generations of taxpayer investment and public service. Capacity that once lost can't be replaced and may never be replaced. But we know from painful experience that this attack on NCAR is just another instance of senseless destruction and political retribution.
Senator Michael Bennet, Democrat from Colorado, on the Senate floor. There was no roll call vote on his amendment, and the underlying spending bill package passed. It's now heading to President Trump for his signature into law. Politico writing, the Trump administration's efforts to dismantle the education department have emerged as an obstacle in congressional spending talks. Democrats are trying to stop the department from offloading some of its duties to other agencies by pushing for language blocking such moves to be included in spending legislation to fund the Departments of Education, Labor, and Health and Human Services. The language is one of a handful of outstanding issues in the negotiations, according to lawmakers overseeing the spending bill. That was from Politico. And the deadline for funding those departments and preventing the government shutdown or partial government shutdown is the end of the month. President Donald Trump, writes CNN, unveiled a multi-part proposal on Thursday aimed at lowering prescription drug prices and reducing health insurance premiums, as well as increasing price transparency. He also vowed to hold big insurance companies accountable. The plan, which the president is calling on Congress to pass, proposes sending money directly to consumers, not insurers, as he has advocated for in recent months amid the debate over whether to extend the Affordable Care Act's enhanced premium subsidies, which expired at the end of last year. Reporting from CNN, President Trump posted a 5-minute video. Here's the first minute of it.
Today, I'm thrilled to announce my plan to lower health care prices for all Americans and truly make health care affordable again. We're doing things that nobody's ever been able to do. We're calling it the Great Health Care Plan. Instead of putting the needs of big corporations and special interests first, our plan finally puts you first and puts more money in your pocket. The government is going to pay the money directly to you. It goes to you, and then you take the money and buy your own health care. Nobody's ever heard of that before, and that's the way it is. The big insurance companies lose, and the people of our country win. This proposal locks in the massive discounts on prescription drugs that my administration is achieving through our most favored nation drug pricing agreement. Now, when you hear about that, for 40 years they've been trying to do it, but they never were able to do it. No other president was able to do it. I got every other country to approve it. By the use of tariffs and other things, they all approved it.
President Donald Trump, part of his video he posted today about his health care proposal. His plan would also, according to him, fund a cost-sharing reduction program, which would reduce the most common Affordable Care Act plan premiums by over 10% and would require health insurers to post coverage comparisons in plain English and information about overhead costs and claim denial rates, and would require providers who accept Medicare or Medicaid to publicly and prominently post their pricing and fees to avoid surprise medical bills. The administration has set up a new website with this plan, greathealthcare.gov. CBS News writing that Republican senators said Thursday that a long-sought bipartisan compromise to extend the expired Affordable Care Act's enhanced premium tax credits for 2 years has stalled. Senator Bernie Moreno of Ohio said, "We are in a little bit of a pothole," blaming Democratic leaders for the lack of movement on the issue. He said, "So for me, I'm going to take a pause until I hear affirmative statements from the Democrat leader and his leadership team that they're willing to contemplate a deal that extends these enhanced premium tax credits with reforms that we've outlined." reporting from CBS News. Senate Democratic leader, the minority leader of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, spoke today on the Senate floor about his party's agenda for bringing down costs. He quotes Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, who did an interview on News Nation this week.
I just want to respond to an outrageous thing that happened with the Trump administration yesterday, showing how much of a clueless bubble these people are in. Hold on to your seats. It's hard to believe that Donald Trump's Secretary of Agriculture said this. Oh yeah, very bold solution to the grocery costs. She said, basically, just eat less and spend less. Can you imagine the solution? Can you imagine the solution to higher grocery costs? Eat less and spend less? Now, it's hard for people to believe she said it, so let me read the quote. Quote, she said, we've run over 1,000 simulations. It can cost around $3 a meal for a piece of chicken, a piece of broccoli, corn tortilla, and one other thing. You hear that, America? This is not what Donald Trump's golden age looks like. A piece of chicken, a piece of broccoli, a tortilla, and something else that the Secretary of Agriculture forgot. The people who run this administration are just not serious. This is an insulting way to talk to the American people, telling them, just get by with less and stop complaining about affordability. The American people have had enough of this. So, as I just said, Democrats every day, every week, every month this year are going to put costs front and center in our agenda. This spring, over the next few months, and throughout 2026, Democrats will talk about precisely how a Democratic majority will lower costs for everyday Americans. We're going to go issue by issue, spending weeks at a time, rolling out a plan to lower grocery costs. Then a few weeks later, we'll unveil a vision for electricity and energy costs. We'll roll out a plan to help people afford child care and health care. Lower costs are going to be the North Star now and throughout all of 2026. And when it comes to costs, it's important to begin with housing.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor. He and other Democratic senators also today spoke at the Center for American Progress, going into more detail about their plans on reducing housing costs. C-SPAN covered that, and you can find the video at cspan.org. Senator Schumer also spoke about the major Verizon outage that happened Wednesday. ABC News writing, following a major service outage that left thousands of Verizon customers without the ability to call or text for hours on Wednesday, the nation's largest wireless carrier announced it would give affected customers a $20 credit, quote, to provide some relief. Verizon went on in their statement this morning, yesterday, we did not meet the standards of excellence our customers expect and that we expect ourselves. This credit isn't meant to make up for what happened. No credit really can, but it's a way of acknowledging our customers' time and showing that this matters to us. That was reporting from ABC News. Senator Schumer said on the Senate floor today that he wants this type of compensation to be automatic, not at the discretion of the company.
Well, yesterday, Mr. President, more than 100,000 Verizon users experienced outages and disruptions to their cell service for roughly 10 hours. Obviously, this caused real confusion and disruption for many Americans relying on service for work, emergencies, and other things. It's encouraging that Verizon has said it will give account credits to customers affected by the outage. But this raises a very serious point. At a time of high costs, consumers must always be automatically compensated for service disruptions fully and completely. Last month, I led Senate Democrats in urging Chairman Carr of the FCC to ensure that when outages happen, customers are automatically compensated. Full compensation to customers for service disruption should be mandated, not just a courtesy, not just a suggestion, not just when the company decides to do it, it's okay, and when they decide not to do it, it's okay too, because that's wrong. And again, at a time when Americans want lower costs, automatic refunds when disruptions occur should be the norm for all telecommunication companies and the FCC has a responsibility to require just that.
The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, today on the Senate floor. Bloomberg Law writing that Congress would largely bar 401k and pension fund managers from considering environmental, social, and governance factors in making investment decisions under legislation passed by the House of Representatives. The House approved the Protecting Prudent Investment of Retirement Savings Act in a 213 to 205 vote on Thursday. 3 Democrats joined 210 Republicans to pass the legislation. That was from the article at Bloomberg Law. Congressman Rick Allen, Republican from Georgia, the bill's sponsor, spoke on the House floor before the vote.
In 2022, the Biden administration heavy-handedly put the retirement security of over 150 million Americans at risk by issuing a deeply flawed rule to enable retirement plan fiduciaries to consider or choose investments based on environmental, social, and governance, or ESG factors. Folks, that is not free market. That is not capitalism. It is proven that ESG factors that often charge steeper fees, guarantee higher risk, have lower returns, and are well-known underperformers. That is precisely why this rule garnered bipartisan, bicameral disapproval in the form of a Congressional Review Act resolution that passed both the House and the Senate. However, the Biden-Harris administration vetoed the resolution, choosing to prioritize left-wing environmental and social issues ahead of retirees' financial security. As chairman of the Health Subcommittee, I remain committed to protecting the retirement savings of workers, retirees, and their families. The Protecting Prudent Investment of Retiree Savings Act would codify that retirement plan sponsors must make investment decisions solely based on economic factors and financial returns. Additionally, the bill states that the decision to exercise a shareholder right is subject to the purchase and loyalty duties under ERISA. It states that proxies held by ERISA plans must be voted in the economic interest of the plan, not used to advance radical policies and favors to crony capitalists.
Congressman Rick Allen, Republican from Georgia, on the House floor. Congressman Sean Casten, Democrat from Illinois, spoke against the bill.
ERISA already requires fiduciaries to act solely in the financial interests of plan participants and beneficiaries. H.R. 2988 does not strengthen that standard. It simply assumes that a handful of paternalistic legislators know more about the interests of America's business owners than they do. Before coming to Congress, I was a CEO of an energy company. We raised a couple $100 million to build that business, and I was understandably accountable to a board appointed by those investors. Now, I'm trying to imagine a world where I showed up at a board meeting and told the owners of the company that I was leading that they were not allowed to ask me certain questions because, in my judgment, I had determined that their questions were non-pecuniary. That is not a world where I would have been employed for very long. It also wouldn't have been good for our business because, look, different investors have different time horizons. You got short-term investors who are concerned about next year's cash flows. But then you're going to have long-term investors like pension funds and endowments and family offices who are going to be concerned about longer-term risks, including but not limited to your governance, your environmental exposures, who you hire, what kind of liabilities you're taking on. And that's fine. That's how a functioning market works. But H.R. 2988 prioritizes those short-term investors by creating an arbitrary distinction between pecuniary and non-pecuniary risk factors that requires investors to ignore financially relevant information that they, in their sole discretion, believe impact long-term performance. Why should we mandate ignorance?
Congressman Sean Casten, Democrat from Illinois, today on the House floor. The House passed this bill by a vote of 213 to 205, sending it to the Senate. 210 Republicans joining 3 Democrats in voting yes. Those 3 Democrats, Andre Carson of Indiana, Henry Cuellar of Texas, and Adam Gray from California. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 292, NASDAQ up 58, S&P up 17. Bloomberg has an article, Wall Street banks handed back a record amount of capital to shareholders as surging profits and relaxing capital rules gave executives the confidence to ramp up stock buybacks. The 6 biggest U.S. banks paid out more than $140 billion in dividends and buybacks in 2025, surpassing the record set in 2019 during President Donald Trump's first term. J.P. Morgan Chase and Company repurchased more than $30 billion of stock, a high for Wall Street banks, and more than triple what it bought back 2 years earlier. That was from Bloomberg. Bloomberg government writing, U.S. Chamber President and CEO Suzanne Clark, in laying out a big sweep defense of capitalism and economic growth, warned voters' frustration over rising costs has led some to seek socialist policies. Suzanne Clark spoke at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce annual State of American Business Conference in Washington, D.C.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a year for choosing. Not only is it America's 250th anniversary, but it's a year when these competing visions for America's economic future, they feel like they're coming to a head, right? Americans are seeking solutions to very real and very pressing economic challenges. Inflation remains stubbornly high, everything from groceries to utilities, things in their daily lives. It feels expensive. Household budgets are getting squeezed. The limited housing supply is pushing up prices. We're making homeownership affordable for too few younger Americans. We hear all the time about health care, right? That affordability is hard, that access is hard. People worry about it. It isn't new, but we've had decades of partisan attempts to try to fix it that have not worked. And we are desperate for a bipartisan solution that could address the problem, that could address affordability, access, and innovation. And what about jobs? Do you go anywhere where someone isn't talking about jobs, or an employer isn't really concerned about where to find workers? Where a human isn't really worried, do I have the skills I need? Are there going to be opportunities that I need? And then you have the whole AI over it. We're optimistic about the long term, but there's a general sense of unease about the future of work. Now, to be clear, there is a lot to celebrate about our standard of living, and that has a lot to do with growth and a lot to do with free enterprise. But we'd be wrong to deny the frustration that so many Americans are feeling. And we'd be really wrong to ignore the implications of those feelings, because what we're seeing is voters who are really desperate for solutions, really thinking about these challenges, and a growing number of them are willing to consider alternatives to the status quo, willing to throw out capitalism and try something completely different.
Suzanne Clark, President and CEO of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, at today's conference in Washington. From Philadelphia Inquirer, federal prosecutors in Philadelphia have charged dozens of people in a wide-ranging scheme to fix basketball games in recent years in the NCAA and the Chinese Professional League, according to court documents unsealed Thursday morning. According to indictments targeting about 24 people, sports gamblers and others worked to recruit players to participate in a variety of schemes to impact the game, including a point-shaving operation in which players were bribed to underperform and bettors would cast wagers against that player's team. That was from the Philadelphia Inquirer. David Metcalf, U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, spoke at a news conference in Philadelphia.
Competition is a basic element of human meaning and human purpose. Many of us, we love sports, we watch sports, we play sports because it fulfills a basic need for the competitive spirit and the need to belong to something greater than ourselves. In a messy world, we often turn to the purity of sports to cheer for something that represent us and our values and where we come from. When criminals pollute the purity of sports by manipulating competition, it doesn't just imperil the integrity of sports betting markets, it imperils the integrity of sport itself and everything that sports represent to us, hard work, determination, and fairness. And when that happens, the Department of Justice will step in to protect what is a sacred institution of American life. And that's what we're doing here today. We are stepping in, and our office is announcing criminal charges against 26 defendants that we allege perpetrated a transnational criminal scheme to fix NCAA Division I men's basketball games, as well as Professional Chinese Basketball Association games. In the indictment and related filings that we unsealed today, we allege an extensive international criminal conspiracy of NCAA players, alumni, and professional bettors who fixed games across the country and poisoned the American spirit of competition for monetary gain. I encourage everyone to read the indictment, which was unsealed this morning. It alleges violations of sports bribery and fraud laws. But in its essence, this is a prosecution of the criminal corruption of collegiate athletics. And as we allege in the indictment, this was a scheme that spanned 3 years and eventually enveloped 17 NCAA Division I men's programs, dozens of college athletes, and fixed games.
David Metcalf, U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, at today's news conference in Philadelphia. NCAA President Charlie Baker putting out a statement. Protecting competition integrity is one of the utmost importance for the NCAA. We are thankful for law enforcement agencies working to detect and combat integrity issues and match manipulation in college sports. The pattern of college basketball game integrity conduct revealed by law enforcement today is not entirely new information to the NCAA. Through helpful collaboration and with industry regulators, we have finished or have open investigations into almost all the teams in today's indictment. That statement from the NCAA President Charlie Baker. From Associated Press, an ailing astronaut returned to Earth with 3 others on Thursday, ending their space station mission more than a month early in NASA's first medical evacuation. SpaceX guided the capsule to a middle-of-the-night splashdown in the Pacific near San Diego less than 11 hours after the astronauts exited the International Space Station. Their first stop was a hospital for an overnight stay. Reporting from Associated Press. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman was at an early morning news conference at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas.
At 3:41 a.m. Eastern Time, SpaceX Dragon Endeavour spacecraft successfully splashed down off the coast of California in pristine weather. This mission brought Crew 11 safely home. NASA astronauts Zena Cardman, Mike Fink, JAXA astronaut Kimye Yui, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Platonov are all safe and in good spirits. All crew members are currently undergoing the routine post-splashdown medical evaluation. The crew member of concern is doing fine. We will share updates on their health as soon as it's appropriate to do so. Over the past 5 months aboard the International Space Station, Crew 11 completed a series of demanding and productive mission objectives. The crew spent more than 850 hours on scientific studies, including research on bone loss and microgravity, and the long-term storage of cryogenic fluids in space with direct applications in medical and industrial fields. This work advanced our understanding of long-duration spaceflight and contributed valuable research that benefit life here on Earth and further human exploration. To be overwhelmingly clear, Crew 11 was a very successful mission. While this was the first time we had to return crew slightly ahead of schedule, NASA was ready. The team responded quickly and professionally, as did the teams across the agency, working closely with our commercial partners, and executed a very safe return. This is exactly why we train, and this is NASA at its finest. Spaceflight will always carry some degree of uncertainty. That is the nature of exploration. Fundamentally, it's why we're in space, to learn. It's why NASA prepares for the unexpected, so we are ready to respond decisively and safely. The successful return of Crew 11 is a direct result of that preparation.
NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman at an early morning news conference at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. NBC News writing about this. The next rotation of space station crew members was scheduled to lift off no earlier than February 15th, but NASA said it is looking into options to bump up that flight. Still, Chris Williams is likely to be the only NASA astronaut overseeing U.S. science experiments and operations on the station for at least a few weeks. That was from NBC News. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. For the latest on what's happening in Washington, sign up for C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, word for word, at cspan.org. I hope you have a good night